In this video, I'll be discussing 5 tips on the main deck Unchained Soul monsters, Charvara, Shyama, Abominable, and Disaster. The video that was previously released was on the Unchained twins, specifically Aruha, Rakea, and Sarama. There will be a future video on the extra deck monsters, the spells and traps, combos and techs as well, so stay tuned for those. First, we'll be talking about Charvara, which is a level 6 Fire Fiend with 2000 attack and 1500 defense, which is played as a 3 in every Unchained deck currently. It has 2 hard once per turn effects, one of which is when it's sent to the graveyard, which includes from the hand, deck, field, or as an XYZ material, you can set an Unchained spell or trap card directly from your deck. This is one of the reasons that Wailing is starting to see play. It is now a searchable out for floodgates, such as Skill Drain. The only spell or trap card you can't set with Sharvara is Abomination's Prison, because it is not an Unchained card. It does not include the words Unchained in its name. Returning Charvara from the banished zone to the graveyard is one way I can think of that would not trigger its effect to set a card. Charvara's second effect is that you can, as a quick effect, during the main phase, target a set card you control or a fiend you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon this card. If special summoned this way, you are locked into fiends. So if you were to link off Charvara, you will no longer be locked into fiends, meaning that Charvara is the better starter if you're trying to play some sort of hybrid that plays the Unchained cards, because they are very good and you can potentially put them together with some other deck. Although if your deck is mostly a fiend deck, that's really irrelevant. It's just a softer fiend lock than from Aruha or Rakea, as it is also an Unchained Soul monster, unlike Rakea or Aruha or Sarama, so you can use it to go directly into things like Unchained Soul of Rage and Anguish because it is an Unchained Soul monster. Usually, if you do the standard combo, Charvara will be used as an XYZ material for your Wave High King Caesar, meaning that when you detach it to activate the effect of Wave King Caesar, it'll go to the graveyard and will be able to set a trap card, and this usually happens on your opponent's turn. So often you'll get to trigger it once on your turn and once on your opponent's turn as well. Being a level 6 fiend, it is useful for getting access to Wave High King Caesar, which is just a solemn warning on legs that can be used twice per turn, which I'll talk about more in the extra deck video as it has some rulings worth knowing about. The other new level 6, which is the Water Fiend, Shyama, is a one-of played in almost every deck at 1, which makes it an excellent target for DD Crow. So if you're unsure of what card you should DD Crow in this deck list, it is Shyama and you should probably target it before its graveyard effect is activated, because if you Crow it in response the target will still be destroyed, which could continue the plays of the Unchained deck. Now, I specify DD Crow because Shyama is a water monster, so it is not susceptible to Bestials. Bestials still have some use in the matchup and will probably be used to target your Unchained Soul Lord of Yama, Abomination, Disaster, Rage, or Abominable since they're all dark, and Druis Worm is pretty good against Unchained because its effect can send them to the graveyard instead of destroying them. Shyama has 2 hard once per turn effects that are both worth playing, and you'll be using both of them almost every single turn of the game. Charvara's effect to destroy from hand and Shyama's effect to destroy from the graveyard are often what are used to play through Nibiru, which we'll talk about later. The reason you play Shyama at 1 is it's a card you don't really want to draw, but if you do draw it, it's not impossible to get out of your hand. You can summon it off of one of the Unchained twins, or you can discard it to the graveyard using your Abominable Unchained Souls effect to destroy a card. Keep in mind that the trap card's floating effects cannot summon from the hand, so Shyama cannot be summoned from the hand using one of the graveyard effects of the trap cards when they are destroyed, but it could be summoned off of chamber, although that's probably not going to happen often as most of your traps will get popped before they've been set long enough to activate them. And if chamber were set long enough, you'd probably be summoning something else with chamber, like Yama or Abomination. Usually, this card gets summoned out of the deck during the combo by any one of the floating from deck effects. In super desperate times, you can always tribute summon Shyama, which can be the best play depending on what's going on in the scenario. There can be scenarios where you need to trigger a Yama in the graveyard in turn 1, and this card's first effect can just destroy something to meet that condition to keep playing. On to Shyama's effects. Its on-field effect is to target one card you control and destroy it. Then you can destroy one spell or trap card on the field which does not target. So this can be used to push through back row, or it can be used to trigger not only one of your Unchained cards, but 2 of them, because you can pop one with the initial targeting and then destroy one of your spell and trap cards with the second one to trigger 2 cards at the same time. Generally, you'll be using this on one of your Unchained twins, and you can use it to pretty much turn any of the Unchained twins into your other level 6 Charvara so that you can go into Wave High King Caesar if you try to make Caesar right away. To play around Nib, by just simply summoning Charvara and Shyama at the same time, you'll be passing on the ability to use the second effect of this card because it'll be trapped underneath Caesar until you negate the activation of a card effect that would special summon a monster. So you usually try and summon Caesar later in the combo, but I understand the fear of Nibiru and trying to summon it early. But you might need the second effect to make your full board. This second effect of Shyama can be used while it's in the graveyard. It's an ignition effect you can use during your main phase. You can target one set card you control or one fiend monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, special summon this card from the graveyard. But it will go to the bottom of the deck if it leaves the field. But if you use it for an XYZ material that go to the graveyard from a monster are not considered to have left the field, so it will not get shuffled back into the deck. It'll go to the graveyard when detached. So if you were to make wave High King Caesar with Shyama, it will eventually wind up back in the graveyard. Every once in a while, this card will get shuffled into the deck because it gets nibiru while it was summoned by its own effect. You could just summon it out again with another one of your spells, trap cards, or twins. I mentioned how both this card and Charvara are useful for playing around Nib. Usually by the time you've gotten through a decent portion of your combo, your Yama will already be in the graveyard, and if you either have a Charvara in your hand, or a Shyama in the graveyard, which you can use them to destroy a card in order to special summon it, and trigger Yama's effect to summon back your Soul of Rage, so that you have enough bodies to potentially link into a backup combo. The backup combo is usually into Muckraker, with Nightmare Griffin co-linked to it, so you get to set a card and you might get to draw a card as well, assuming you didn't use Pot of Prosperity earlier in the turn. This is the Unchained deck's way of playing through Nib. It's not really you can play around Nib, more like you play through Nib. You get mibbed, and you still play. Either one of these cards is great for this, because you can use them after you've already set up the combo in order to still make a board, despite having been nibiru'd. And nibiru is often baited out by simply having the 2 level 6s on the field. The Abominable Unchained Soul is generally played as a one that you can special off of any of the spells, traps, or twins from the deck when you need it. It says 3 effects, and one of them is that when it's special summoned you can discard 1 card as a cost and destroy 1 card on the field. This doesn't target. It's often summoned during the battle phase during the damage step by crashing one of your monsters into your opponent's monsters. It's also a brick because you don't really want to draw it, but you can summon it from your hand pretty easily. Its second effect is if a card on your field is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. It's also an Unchained Soul, so you can make any of the Link monsters using this card, with the exception of Abomination, because it is not a Link monster, meaning you have to make a Link monster before that. If you summon this during the damage step, you can play around things like impermanence being used on it. You can also use it against things like Runic Fountain, that allows your opponent's runic cards to be activated from the hand. So if you crash one of your normal summon twins into one of your opponent's monsters, you can summon Abominable during the damage step, and then use it to destroy Runic Fountain, so that they can't activate their runic cards in their hand anymore. Abominable Unchained Soul doesn't actually have a hard once per turn on any of its effects. It can only be special summoned once per turn. So, in a theoretical sense, you can only activate the effect to destroy once per turn because it can only be special summoned once per turn. But due to the Master 4 revisions, if a monster has not successfully been summoned, it is not considered to have been summoned. So if your opponent were to use Appaloosa to prevent you from summoning your Abominable Unchained Soul every single time one of your cards is destroyed, you can try to activate it again and again and again in your hand to bait out the Appaloosa's negates as many times as necessary while also not having technically been summoned. So it will stay in your hand, and you can just keep using it every time a card is destroyed until it finally gets summoned while also chain blocking all of your floating effects. It has a second effect to special summon itself from the graveyard if it was destroyed on the field this turn, but it goes to the bottom of the deck when it would leave the field. This is unlikely to happen on your turn. Odds are you'll summon it on your turn to try and push through something, and then on your opponent's turn they will destroy it for you, or you can pop it with Escape, and then during the end phase you can bring it back to destroy another card, so that's 2 bricks down, 1 brick to go. We have Unchained Soul of Disaster, a level 8 Dark Fiend with 0 attack and 3000 defense. This one is usually considered the ultimate brick, and is usually considered better for going second, and it's sometimes even side decked for when you know for sure you're going second after you've won game 1 against a deck that will choose to go first next game. It's also really good in the mirror match as its effect doesn't destroy things, so it won't trigger your opponent's Unchained cards. If you do brick on Disaster, just like Shyama and Abominable, you can summon them from your hand using the effects of one of the twins. You cannot summon from the deck using the spells and trap cards, you would have to summon it from the hand using the twins. This card doesn't have an ability to special summon itself, similar to Shyama, so Abominable is the easiest brick to get out of your hand. The other 2 must use a twin to get them out of your hand, unless you tribute summon them or use Chambers on field effect or Yama's floating effect. You can also summon them from your hand with Chamber. The first effect of Disaster is a continuous one. It gains 300 attack per Unchained card in your graveyard. Be mindful that Abomination's Prison is not an Unchained card and does not count towards this 300 attack boost. Now that there are a lot of Unchained names, it's not very difficult for this card to be incredibly big. Its second effect is an on-field ignition effect. You can use it during your main phase. You can target an opponent's monster and link summon using it in Disaster to link summon a Dark Link monster, unlike Rage, which must use a special summon monster, meaning this card is better when your opponent's running a normal summon reliant deck. But you still must go into a dark monster using this effect. Odds are you'll be linking into a Link 2, unless you use your opponent's Link 2, in which case you can go into a Link 3, or if you use your opponent's Link 3, you can go into a Link 4, and so on. So if their monster is a higher Link rating, you can climb even higher. If your opponent's monster is a Fiend, you can even link into Yama, because it is a Dark Fiend, but requires 2 Fiends, so unless your opponent's playing a Fiend monster, you will not be able to link into a Yama using Unchained Soul of Disaster. It is legal to activate Disaster against any monster. You are even allowed to activate it against a card such as Expurling War, even when it has 5 materials on it. It'll be unaffected when the effect resolves if it has 5 materials at that time. But potentially you could bait them into using the effect, so it'll become affected by the time the effect resolves. This is an effect that is considered to special summon, so it can be negated by things like Wave High King Caesar or Tearlament's Rukalos, because this effect, even though it performs a game mechanic summon, is still considered an effect that includes the ability to special summon. Although, the actual special summon is a game mechanic link summon, so it doesn't trigger things like Sky Striker Ace Ray. It would trigger something like Mirror Jade's effect to be able to destroy all of your cards during the end phase, because you are sending it to the graveyard by your card, even though it is not sent by your card effect. Which is why Ray wouldn't trigger, but Mirror Jade can. This effect is often used when trying to recover from being nibiru'd. You often link with your opponent's nib so that they don't have a monster that's big enough to beat over your board that you're going to make after the effect. Often you can just do the same board without Disaster by using Anguish instead since it has the same effect, but you need an extra body. Disaster's other effect is a trigger effect that can only be activated when it is destroyed by battle or card effect while it is on the field. You can target one Unchained monster other than Unchained Soul of Disaster, and special summon it, so that includes the Link monsters, so this is one of the ways to get free Link value by summoning back your Link 2s or your Link 3s like Rage, Yama, and Anguish. It's also just an additional floating effect. It's probably the easiest way to recycle cards from the graveyard to the field, but it's still a brick. So as this is a 5 tips video, we've gone through all 4 of the Unchained Souls that live in the main deck this video, and the twins were in the last video. There are no other Unchained Souls in the main deck, so tip 5 will be on the other cards that are often played in the Unchained deck in the main deck. That includes Tour Guide from the Underworld, Fiendish Rhino Warrior, and Vice King Requiem. So first, we'll talk about Tour Guide from the Underworld, often known as the Hand Trap Magnet, ever since it's been played in Burning Abyss. Although hand trapping it in BA was much better, as all of your BAs would destroy themselves when you summon them while you control the Tour Guide and they weren't negated, and Tour Guide summons the monster negated. That's also important because you're going to be summoning Fiendish Rhino Warrior, and Fiendish Rhino Warrior allows Tour Guide to be a 1-card combo as it gets you 2 cards worth of value, while the standard Unchained combo usually involves by popping a trap with either a Ruha or Sharvara to summon the other so you can link into Yama to set a trap. Because the Rhino Warrior comes out negated, its effect to protect all other fiends you control by destruction by battle or card effects will not be applied when summoned by Tour Guide. Tour Guide can also summon from hand, so if you brick on the Fiendish Rhino Warrior, you can still summon it from the hand. You could also pitch it from the hand with your Abominable Unchained Soul if you really felt the need to do so. Going Tour Guide into Rhino also gives you the ability to chain block your Unchained Soul of Yama because you'll link into Yama, and go Yama 1 and Rhino 2. Rhino can then send Charvara or Shyama, depending on if you have a trap card or not. That way you can avoid Ash Blossom or Imperm on Yama, although odds are it would have been used on a Tour Guide if they had it. If you draw a Tour Guide later in the game, you can use it to summon one of the twins from the deck or the 3rd Tour Guide. They are all still level 3 fiends, and if their effects are negated, it's not usually important because you can still destroy them with your other cards and get value out of them. If you open the Rhino Warrior, you might even prefer to bring out one of the twins instead and just start popping those using your Sharvara or a Ruha to continue to play, and you still get value out of Tour Guide because it is still a fiend, so you can still make Yama with it. Sharvara can be used in combination with Tour Guide to avoid things like Imperm. You can also do this to avoid Imperm on your Yama. This is because they are fiend monsters, and the effect of Sharvara is a quick effect, so you can blank these on your opponent, although you may want to still save Sharvara to be used on your trap cards instead or to help play through Nid. So, you'll have to take an extra moment and think, do I need this card to resolve, or do I want to pop another card later? Tour Guide is also the standard counter card for when you get hit with a Dimension Shifter. You normal summon Tour Guide, summon either a twin or your Fiendish Rhino Warrior, overlay for Darius, which requires 2 level 3 fiend monsters, and because this card is a DDD card, you can then overlay for DDD Divisor King Mach and X, which will have the ability to attach a card when your opponent activates its effect. It's also a 3000 attack and defense body. Additionally, you can attack into your opponent's cards, allowing you to make a Zeus on top of Mach-In X, giving you a 4-material Zeus, which is pretty good for a 1-card combo. Fiendish Rhino Warrior can also be recycled from the graveyard using your Yama, preventing your cards from being destroyed by battle or card effects until they deal with Fiendish Rhino Warrior. Also, reviving it gives you an additional opportunity to send off a Fiendish Rhino Warrior other than your turn 1 combo. If you want to play the Vice King Requiem package, the cards you usually play on your deck are simply 3 Dark Contract with the Gate. To search Vice King Requiem and Vice King Requiem itself. Requiem has a pendulum effect that allows you to special summon it by destroying the contract. So if you use Contract, search Requiem, you can scale Requiem, use Requiem's effect to summon itself, by destroying the Dark Contract, which will put it in the graveyard, which is important for its second effect. When it's on field, it has an effect that locks you into DDDS, so in almost every scenario, you will then have to make a Mach-In X over the Requiem. Otherwise, you will be locked into DDDs, and that is not generally what you're going to want to do. By overlaying your Vice King Requiem into a Mach-In X, it adds an additional effect to Mach-In X, which is really useful in the Unchained deck. So all the Dark Contracts pretty much turn into search a free special summon that also can gain this effect. The monster has been summoned with Vice King Requiem as material, gains the effect to once per turn destroy a card on the field. Either field by shuffling a Dark Contract from your graveyard into your deck, and gain 1000 life points, which gives you both an additional starter by popping any of your spells or trap cards, or one of your normal summons like Rakea or Sarama as well. It can also be a way to push through your opponent's boards. It's also a way to win in time by gaining life points. It also increases your number of 1-card Zeus plays in the deck because you can not only bait out a card using this effect, you can also then attack into your opponent's card with a 3000 attack monster and then overlay for a 2-material Zeus as the effect to pop a card does not detach a material. If you open the Requiem and the deck plays Wave High King Caesar, which has a secondary effect when it's sent to the graveyard, you can search for a Dark Contract that means that this engine is also accessible should you make your Wave High King Caesar, and it gets linked off, or destroyed, or outed, or just when it's used and you link it off next turn. So it can be used to turn on your Brick Requiem or can just be used to search for Requiem and do the play next turn. If you start off by searching your Requiem with a Dark Contract, you won't have a use for the Dark Contract later, which is unfortunate. There's no other DDDs worth playing necessarily in the main deck for Unchained, so the excess contracts become semi-bricks in the deck later in the game. Although, if you have Machine X, you can use them to resolve Machine X's actual monster effect. Its effect to attach an opponent's monster that activates its effect, which includes when pendulum scale effects are used, and also monsters that are used as equipment spells, so like a Bee-Buster Drake used in the back row is also a valid response window for Machine X can be used by detaching 2 materials or by destroying a Dark Contract you control. The extra Dark Contracts you might draw, you can just place them on the field so that you can destroy them as if using 2 material on Machine X to attach an opponent's monster card, which is pretty good versus Fluenderies. In the next video, we'll be talking about the Unchained extra deck, and you can also click this video here to learn about the Unchained twins, which I talked about previously.